Good morning from the cottage farmstead. It's about 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning and I'm just getting into the kitchen to work on our meals for the week. Farmer Nathan and I both work full-time outside of the home, so eating from scratch food throughout the week requires a little bit of planning and setting aside time. We're often asked how we manage to eat so much from scratch food when it does take a little bit more time, to be honest. One of the ways is we do set aside a couple hours every weekend to work on preparing food for the coming week and for several weeks. So this morning I'm going to show you how I am making lunches for the week and making yogurt for a couple weeks out, as to give you an idea of what it looks like in our homestead kitchen. First up is making some yogurt and getting the milk heating up. Farmer Nathan forgot a gallon of raw milk in his car for an hour or two last week, and so we are not going to drink that straight raw. We are going to use this heating up method for yogurt so it'll pasteurize it for us. I learned this method of making yogurt from the Prairie Homestead a couple years ago. We really like it. It saves dishes, time. It'll make, in our little pot here, it makes 3 quarts of yogurt, which will last us for almost a month. With buying 2 gallons a week, if you're just a family of 2, we do have excess milk periodically, and that's just a great time to make another batch of yogurt. So like I said, we make it in mason jars. So I like putting a tea towel sized rag into the pot before I put the glass jars in. Just regular old mason jars. In our particular pot, it fits 3. If you had a slightly larger pot, you could probably get 4 in it. The tea towel in there just makes sure that the jars, as they jiggle a little bit when the water starts boiling, that they don't clang around, crack each other. I have cracked a few jars, so this just helps prevent that. And now for the milk. I pour the milk into the jars. You want to pour it into the jars first, because if you start pouring the water in and then try to add the milk, the jars are actually going to start floating in the water, so you need the weight of the milk in the jars to hold them down. Next you start adding the water, and you will pour it in around the jars. And I pour and leave about an inch of head space on the top of the pot, just so when it does start boiling, it won't boil the water into my milk. That's going to be my yogurt, but otherwise, I mean, you can go up to the shoulder of the jar. Really what we're doing is the water is going to heat up the milk to the right temperature for us to start culturing the yogurt. Now we're going to turn it on our stove, it's about medium-high heat, to start letting the water heat up to heat up the milk. We have a blog post on how to make milk this particular method, so I will link that below. But what we're looking for is when the water starts boiling, the top of the milk will start developing like a skin on top of it, and it starts slowly creeping across the top, and once it intersects in the top, the milk is the right temperature to pull out. If you wanted to use a thermometer, it would be about 180 degrees, but that skin occurs at that precise temperature, so we don't bother with the thermometer anymore. And like I mentioned before, this particular method does pasteurize the milk, so if you wanted raw milk yogurt, you'd have to do a different process and keep it at a lower temperature while it cultures. But since this milk was accidentally left out and it was raw milk, we don't want to drink it raw anymore, so we're going to heat it up to pasteurizing temperature. So meanwhile, we're going to get some black beans started in our slow cooker so that we'll have beans for our burrito bowls that we'll be eating for lunch this coming week. With dry beans, it is 3/4 of a cup dry beans to about 1 can of beans that you would buy at the grocery store. So for our burrito bowls, we usually go through about 2 cans of beans approximately, so I'm going to be putting 1.5 cups in here. And these are beans that we grew last year. We love growing drying beans. I mean, they're beautiful plants, and then seeing like popping up in the shells and finding all the different colors. We've did some pinto looking beans, we've done red slippery silk beans, we have Cherokee Trotier and black turtle mixed in here, and we're growing some of those again this year. So we just love being able to grow some of our own beans. It's a great way to have some extra protein that we can grow ourselves since we don't have enough land to raise our own meat. This is a great way to grow some of our own protein. Since beans absorb a lot of water, we're going to fill the rest of this little small crock pot to the top with water, and it's going to absorb a good chunk of that. So since this is going to be going in burrito bowls, I'm going to add a little bit of flavoring as I cook the beans. It just depends on what dish I'm putting it in. Most of the time I cook them unseasoned. But I'm going to put a little bit of onion powder, garlic powder, and oregano here to give it a little bit of Mexican flavor in the beans as well as the rest of the burrito bowl later. And as you can see, our house is really humid. Our onion powder has solidified, so I'll just break off a little chunk and throw in there. My garlic powder is starting to do the same. Some in there. The one ingredient that you don't want to add when you first start cooking the beans is salt. Salt will prevent the beans from absorbing the water, and they'll end up just crunchy and not as appealing to eat. So I add salt at the very end of the process. Now that I have all the ingredients in my pot, I'm going to plug it into the wall, and I'll let it cook for about 8 hours, and then the beans will be done. You've probably heard a lot of people talk about how much time it takes to do dry beans from scratch. If you're going to do the traditional soak them overnight method, yes, it does take a little more time, and you actually have to remember to soak them. And that was always my problem, was remembering to soak the beans the night before. With the slow cooker method, I can start them the same day, and then that evening they'll be ready. And that saves us a ton of time. If we're wanting beans, say for a dinner, I can start them in the morning before I go to work, and we'll have beans ready when I get home. Or if I'm wanting to prepare them in advance like this, it's a great way to just plug it in, go, and we can go work on other things. The one type of bean that you cannot do with this method is kidney beans. Kidney beans, especially the red kidney beans, have a coating on them that is a little bit more toxic. So those do require soaking, dumping the water out, and then boiling them for about 15 minutes to get rid of that toxin. So sometimes I do just buy kidney beans in a jar from the store because it just takes a lot less time, especially if I'm forgetting to put them in to soak. But if I do want kidney beans, I have to plan ahead for that one. So next up is rice. One of the keys to meal prepping from scratch lunches for the entire week is making sure that we can microwave them or reheat them in the toaster or on the stove very quickly, and that they taste good when you reheat them. So rice is a very common ingredient in our lunches if we're not doing soups. So I'm going to get a big pot of that going. The water started boiling. And our favorite type of rice is jasmine rice. In this particular Thai jasmine rice, you put the rice in at the same time as the water. So make sure you read the package on your particular rice, because some of the rices do call for boiling the water first. One of the ways that we keep eating from scratch a wholesome food affordable is we buy things in major bulk, like this giant bag of Thai jasmine rice. And I just need to refill my container again so I have enough rice for this meal and a couple other meals. We like adding a little bit of oil to help with some of the froth when it starts boiling. And we like the flavor of a little bit of salt in our water as well. Now I let it come to a boil, and then we'll turn it down and let it simmer for 15 minutes. So while we wait on the water to boil with the yogurt and the rice, I'm going to get a big crock pot full of chicken broth going. Actually, I think this is turkey broth. We saved the carcass in pieces from the turkey this past Thanksgiving, and we've been slowly cooking it over time into different broths. We like making broth in advance and freezing it. First off, I have food allergies and I cannot eat broth that's been made at a store. So I have to make my own from scratch. So this is a great way for us to make it in advance, freeze it in some jars, and I can pull it out whenever I need it to make soups in the future. So it makes quick meals in the future since I have a couple extra hours today. And I think all of the ingredients from this, except the thyme, salt, and pepper, came from our garden or from local sources. So this turkey carcass came from a local bird that we got back at Thanksgiving. It's our first main ingredient in there. And then we harvested our onions not too long ago. And these are the scraps, so the outer shells, the root side. So we'll stick some of these scraps in here. Save the rest of them for another round of broth. And these carrots are ones that we harvested about a month ago, or 2 months ago I think at this point. And we put about 2 to 3 carrots worth of carrots in there. And this is some parsley that we've had dehydrated in the past, so give that a sprinkle on top. I'm going to do the same with some celery leaves. Give it a little bit of the celery flavor in there. Do some pepper. This is our minced garlic from last year. It's about time to make another batch of it. And we love garlic, so I'm just going to do 2 big blobs of it in there, maybe about 3 tablespoons worth. Do a dash of apple cider vinegar. This helps get some of the minerals out of the bone. Do a sprinkle of thyme. I don't want it to be overly flavored because I am going to use this in other soups in the future, but I do like a little bit of thyme in there. And then lastly, a good dose of salt. And I will add salt in the recipe later, but I do like a fair amount in my broth to start with. Then I'll just fill it up to the brim with water and cook it on low the rest of the day. One of the tricks for my food allergies is I can't have slow cooked meat. So I don't cook my broth like the 24, 48 hours of some of the bone broth lovers out there. I only do about 8 hours, and that's probably about the max my body can handle because I'm sensitive to glutamate, and the longer you cook a meat, the more that amino acid breaks apart from the meat, and it is called free glutamate. So I don't cook it quite as long, but it still tastes really good in soup. Because we were able to grow so many of these ingredients ourselves, it's one of the reasons why we're big proponents of growing your own garlic, onions, carrots, and your herbs as some of the first things you grow when you're wanting to be a self-sufficient gardener. A lot of times people get caught up in the romance of canning all of their vegetables, having all of your tomatoes and pickles and jams. But onions, garlic, and carrots are the base of so many of our recipes from cuisines all over the world that if you want to start having about half of your recipes to just be grown in your own backyard, these classic root vegetables, might seem a little boring to some, are the best place to start. I'll link below to a blog post that we wrote on growing those crops. Those actually are best planted in the fall. So it doesn't have to take away from your summer vegetable garden where you're growing your tomatoes and cucumbers and things. You can grow these over the winter, and they're pretty hands-off. They're fairly easy to grow. So I'll link that below to help you get started on your own self-sufficient garden. Alright, as you can see, the water is just starting to bubble, and you can see along the top of the jars, you can see that there's a skin kind of forming, and what I'm waiting for is for it to go all the way across. So we're very close to having yogurt that is about 180 degrees, which is therefore pasteurized. Now I'm going to let the milk cool down to about 100-115 degrees before I put the starter culture in, which starter culture is just another term for pre-made yogurt. We have yogurt from a previous batch that I'm going to be doing about a tablespoon in each jar, stirring it in, or you can buy plain yogurt from the grocery store and get started, or you can buy a powdered yogurt culture starter. And at this point, our rice is done. So we have all the ingredients we need ready for our burrito bowls. We'll be using a jar of green salsa that we canned last year. We also have some frozen diced peppers, just a handful left while we wait on our coming bell peppers. And as you can see, it only took about an hour to get all that done. It's almost 9 o'clock. I got started at 8 o'clock. So there are ways to multitask in the kitchen to get a lot of from scratch food cooked and prepare in advance for weeks where we're busier so that I can have broth on hand for quick dinners or have yogurt on hand for quick breakfasts. Thank you for joining me in the cottage farmstead kitchen this week as I prepare some of our meals for the week and ingredients for weeks to come. If you're interested in seeing more videos on how we meal prep homestead style, just let me know in the comments below and we'd be happy to create more videos on what we eat, how we make it from scratch, and do it in advance to fit around busy schedules. Happy growing, friends. See you next time.